Good morning, everyone. This is Rob with Vista IT Group. I'm the Technical Service Director over here, and we appreciate everybody taking some time out of your day to join us for about a 30-35 minute webinar on NetApp. Let me get this going. Okay. So before we get started, we'll go through a few logistics questions. If you do have questions throughout the webinar, please use the chat feature, and we'll try and get to those as we close out the webinar. If there are any questions that I cannot answer right now, I will take those offline, and we'll make sure to get those out to you. And actually, I lied. Please don't use the chat feature. Use the Q&A feature that you should be able to see on your Zoom meeting controls. That way we can keep track of all of the questions that are asked and make sure that we're kind of holding ourselves accountable to getting those answered. The survey at the end is really important to us. It provides us good feedback on the contents, the topics, the length, and things like that for these webinars. So it really is helpful for us in making sure that we're hitting on the points that our customers are looking to address. That, I guess more importantly for some people on this webinar, that is your entry into the survey to win a $300 Amazon gift card. So that will pop up automatically there at the end. So please take a few minutes. We'd really appreciate it. And lastly, there is going to be a recording of this webinar, and we are going to send that out in the day or so following, today. So if you do need to leave the webinar, or you have a colleague that you'd like to send this over to, you'll have the ability to do so. We know everybody's schedules can be pretty busy, so we'll send that out. So a quick overview of Vista. We've been in business for quite some time. You can see that we ship quite a number of orders. We've got a lot of customers. They're pretty diverse, both from a small and medium business all the way up to enterprise and even multinational customers. We're shipping all over the globe, literally on a daily basis. And we have some pretty cool capabilities that we've broken up into our 3 core competencies: data center, supply chain, and technology services. So if you would like to learn a little bit more about our capabilities, you can reach out to us. Our contact information is on the website. Or if you do have a Vista account manager, you can reach out to them and we can schedule a time to learn a little bit more about what we do. So let's dive into NetApp and the agenda. So we'll talk about a few announcements. And really, the next 3 topics I look at as a little bit of a singular topic, because they are all driven or kind of dependent on running the ONTAP software on something other than a NetApp array, which is a pretty cool thing. And then we'll move into ActiveIQ. And then lastly, we'll go through a couple of configuration examples and some specials that we've got on our website, just to go through a couple of use cases and where some of these things might be a fit in different environments. So a couple of announcements. ONTAP version 9.6 was recently announced. And we'll run through a couple of improvements there. So more cloud providers for FabricPool. So this is where we've got the ability to tier data within a volume based on a couple of different policies out to pretty much the cloud provider of our choice. We now have encryption over the wire for SnapMirror and FlexCache, so some additional security improvements. And Metro Storage Cluster using IP for entry-level all-flash and FAS ONTAP systems. So again, we're seeing some of these cool features come down into some of the lower-end arrays, where it makes the technology a little easier to consume for some of our small and medium business customers. Some hardware updates here. We've got a new A320, so this is going to be added to the all NVMe, or I should say end-to-end NVMe solution. So again, bringing some of those features and capabilities down into something that's a little more consumable for those small and medium business customers. So this is kind of an array in the same family as the high-end A800, which again is an NVMe, all NVMe system using NVMe over Fiber Channel. And another point here is we've got additional support for operating systems. So previously that support was limited to Red Hat and SUSE. So now we've got some support for some of the more common operating systems, again, in those kind of mid-range environments with ESXi, Windows, and Oracle Linux. Some improvements to ONTAP Select. So again, we're going to be spending a good bit of time on ONTAP Select today. So deployment, licensing, and scalability. We've got a new vCenter plugin to make deployment a little bit easier. We'll talk about some license pooling here in a little bit, and also scalability, which we'll address in some of the slides that will be coming up. So again, a few announcements, and I do know that there should be some more stuff coming out here shortly. So if you are a NetApp customer or are interested in what's new or some new things, again, let us know, and we'd be more than happy to keep you up to speed. So ONTAP Select. Before we start getting into a few of the details, I'll define what ONTAP Select is, and it's a pretty unique offering, and this is one of the things that I really like about NetApp as a storage vendor that is at the top of our list when we're making the choices of where we're going to position storage. It's because they've got a very mature portfolio. They've got a lot of things that are kind of complexities and challenges that are addressed, and this is a great example of it. So they've decoupled the ONTAP operating environment from the hardware. So now we've got the ability to really have some great flexibility in how we deploy this thing, and it really, for the most part, is going to run, look, act, and feel just like ONTAP running on a hardware appliance. So let's talk about a couple of different use cases. One is at the edge. So whether we're talking about a data aggregation point, so with all of the IoT sensors and things like that, and some of the IoT platforms really being, again, more accessible to a very wide range of customers, not just the ultra enterprise. We've got a couple of different kind of cool things that we can do with it. So whether it's putting an appliance in a police car or in an airplane, or whether we're an organization that has a number of remote or small offices, we've got the ability to deploy ONTAP Select without having a dedicated storage array in some of these locations where maybe physically it does not make sense, or even economically it doesn't make sense to deploy these storage devices out in the field. We can absolutely use it in the core. There are a couple of different use cases where, whether you're a small or medium business and this is your primary operating environment, and you want to have the flexibility to decouple the software from the hardware, or even we have plenty of customers that will use the ONTAP Select for the advanced file services, so SIFs and NFS, and use an existing array that might not have file services capabilities. So when we're looking at file systems that are growing, and even for a typical customer of ours, where you're looking at someone that might have 10, 15, 20, 30 terabytes of unstructured data, there are some complexities in there with respect to security and backup and data availability that something like a Windows file system really can't address. So rather than running Windows file services, we can run ONTAP Select as a virtual storage appliance and back that by your 3PAR or your EMC or whatever storage array on the back end that you'd like. And also in the cloud. So we'll touch on that in just a little bit. So whether it's for long-term data archival using some replications or Snap Vault, or we want to use that as part of our data availability methodologies. Again, a lot of different ways that we can use this feature in our environments. So let's talk about a couple of value propositions here. So really, you can deploy ONTAP Select. It's offered as pretty much a virtual storage appliance on any commodity server. So Dell, HP, Cisco, Supermicro, whatever it might be that you're running out there at some of your branch offices, and maybe you only have one system that's running a couple of virtual machines and you want to replicate that data back to a home office or a data center. ONTAP Select is definitely a solution that would be a good fit there. So again, leverage existing storage infrastructure, and you do also have the support for hyper-converged and external array data stores, as I mentioned on the previous slide. So again, if you are looking at a 2, 4, 6, or 8 node environment and you do want to run HCI at a location, this is the platform for you. Kind of some cloud-like agility where we've got the ability to stand this up, and the slide says less than a day, but I can assure you it's quite a bit faster than that. You can dynamically add increments, so it's not like you have to go out and prepay or even pre-provision for storage that you might not use. A lot of our customers that are using this out in remote offices and branch offices only have a little bit of storage that they need to protect and replicate back to a data center. So you don't necessarily need to deploy a 10 or a 15 terabyte array to enable some of those advanced features. Capacity pools gives us the ability to, again, spread our licensing. So from a management and maintenance perspective, if we do have 10, 15, 20, 30 of these remote offices, and we would like to pool the licensing, this is one of the improvements that I mentioned on the introduction slide that gives us the ability to, again, make it a little easier to manage that environment. And lastly here, because ONTAP Select is the ONTAP operating environment, so we have the ability to replicate out to another data center, replicate up to the cloud, and really have a lot of flexibility in how we choose to deploy this. So simplifying operations, so again, common platform, whether it's software or hardware or in the cloud, we can reduce our storage costs because we do have the thin provisioning, deduplication, and compression that we can run on this. And again, this is running on commodity servers. Relatively good scale-out capabilities. And lastly, integrated data protection with snapshots as well as Metro Cluster. And we'll get into a couple of more features here on the next slide. So here's what it's going to look like. In my opinion, the best use case for this is a 1 or a 2 node, or maybe even a 3 or 4 node operating environment out at a remote office where we're going to use either local storage. So this could be, for example, 2 DL380s with 16 10K drives in it. You're going to slap some RAID on those 10K drives, present that up to a hypervisor. So in this case, let's just use ESXi as an example. And we would be able to do this on both hosts, set those ONTAP Select storage appliances up in an HA cluster, and we can present that storage to our hosts using our Ethernet protocols, so iSCSI or NFS, and we can also present that out to end users or other servers in that environment over the Ethernet network. So again, for user shares, home directories, things like that, and then we can replicate that data either up to the cloud or a centralized data center using SnapMirror or SnapVault. So a couple of bullet points to run through here. Again, we do get thin provisioning, cloning, deduplication, compression that's going to come with the software, Metro Storage Cluster. It is super scalable, so we can allocate up to 400 terabytes per node, and whether that's a 1, 2, 4, 6, or 8 node cluster, again, we've got the ability to start small and scale up or scale out. And built for the data fabric, so we have the ability to, again, replicate this pretty much in any direction that we'd like. One bullet point that I do want to reiterate here is that, again, with the software, we can present both block and file protocols to our cluster or our end users with this solution. So that's ONTAP Select, and again, I want to wrap this up with this is a software that we're going to use to run our NetApp services pretty much on anything except for NetApp hardware. I'm going to go ahead and spin this slide all the way out. So NetApp Cloud Volumes ONTAP, or sometimes it will be referred to as CVO, is pretty much the exact same software and capabilities that we have with ONTAP Select, but now we are running this in the public cloud somewhere. So as it would look like an AWS EC2 instance or an Azure virtual machine. And again, we've got a lot of the same features and functionality. And here are some there are some pretty cool use cases that we can talk about. Again, whether we're replicating data out to from a remote office up to the cloud, or we're replicating data from our primary data center out to the cloud as part of our data availability program. So again, we'll take a look at kind of what this looks like in practice. So we could have our primary data center. Let me get my pointer here. So we can have our primary data center, and again, this can be a FAS 2700, 8200, maybe even a previous generation or so of the hardware storage array. We can use SnapMirror or SnapVault to replicate that out to AWS. And even if we wanted to get a little crazy with it, we have the ability to replicate those volumes out to CVO instance running on Azure. So again, kind of diversify where our data is sitting, maybe both geographically and from a service provider perspective. So when we look at the snapshot technology, specifically when we take a look at what this offers for potentially developers and having the ability to replicate our data out to, let's say, AWS and do a lot of our performance and maybe load testing or development, where maybe my on-prem infrastructure can't support spinning up 10, 15, 20 of our particular workload to go through some development cycles. We can most certainly do that with in the cloud with AWS and Azure. When you look at the pay by the hour or pay as you go offerings from both of these providers, or by the day, the month, whatever it might be, we don't necessarily have to size our production infrastructure to support some really aggressive test and development cycles. And when we look at what that kind of enables, even for a small or medium business that's writing some of its own code, you can really give those folks that are coding access to a lot of resources and give them up-to-date data that's replicated from your production environment on a daily or an hourly basis, whatever it might be. So that's kind of it for NetApp CVO. So again, a lot of the same capabilities when it comes to running ONTAP Select, and again, a lot of the same capabilities to running this in a hardware environment. We'll go ahead and spin this out real quick. So NetApp Data Availability Services for the Hybrid Cloud. This is a functionality that we're really looking forward to seeing some more developments with. Right now, there's, I wouldn't say a limited set of use cases, but this might not be able to satisfy every data availability requirement. This is, but nonetheless, it has some pretty cool capabilities. So the gist of what this is going to offer us is we have the ability to run, again, our on-site cluster, whether this is physical or hardware devices or it's ONTAP Select, and replicate this out. The first kind of step is replicating this out to another device. So that device could be a secondary data center. That device could be a hardware device. It could be ONTAP Select at a secondary data center, or maybe even an ONTAP Select device in your primary data center. And what we're going to be able to do is, as soon as we've got the 2 copies of that data, or again, ONTAP, Cloud Volumes ONTAP running in AWS, we have the ability to present an S3 bucket out to that secondary instance. So we can, it's got a pretty cool and intuitive management platform to allow us to identify volumes that are sitting on our primary array, volumes that are sitting on our target array, that are maybe they are replicated, maybe they're not, or protected, and then volumes that are ultimately have their data that are sent out to this particular S3 bucket for availability. there's some pretty cool search capabilities for recovery. And just like recovering from any other snapshot or recovering a file, we have the ability to identify what backups or snapshots that we have saved out here in this S3 bucket that maybe have long since been purged from our primary or secondary systems. We can identify that snapshot and we can go ahead and recover it in place with the primary infrastructure and overwrite whatever files might be there. Or we have the ability to recover that object as a secondary, and we can kind of go in and pull the data out that we want. So again, it's a relatively new, pretty cool functionality that can be part of a data availability or a data protection program that we have in our environment, leveraging hardware, software-defined storage, and even cloud. So when we look at having cloud conversations with our customers, a lot of times the first place that they're going to dip their toe in is either storing data, storing some archive snapshots, or maybe even starting to look at a disaster recovery, looking at disaster recovery capabilities in the cloud. And this, between Cloud Volumes ONTAP and NetApp Data Availability Services, they're two great ways to start really leveraging the public cloud without increasing complexity, doing lift and shift operations, but just getting your data out in a more economical place and at a geographically diverse location from your primary and maybe even secondary data center facilities. So a couple of points here. Again, I'll kind of zip this out. It's super efficient. So what's, again, cool about running some of NetApp and using NetApp for our data availability and replication is we're going to be able to use deduplication and compression capabilities on the primary data source. And when we're replicating that out to another ONTAP system or even out to an S3 bucket using data availability services, it's going to be using, it's going to be replicating that data that's already deduplicated and compressed. So we're not using up bandwidth, and we're also not occupying storage and having to rehydrate things. I do know that some of the competitors out there right now have to go through a rehydration process before we can start doing some cool things with the data. So this is a pretty cool capability that we've got here. The other one that I really want to touch on without going through line by line on this slide is the security. So anytime we start talking about, even with replication between sites, or we start talking about putting our data into a cloud provider or public cloud provider, is security. So NetApp has gone through a lot of hoops to make sure that this particular service is very secure and that we're using very secure protocols to get our data from point A to point B. So that'll wrap it up for NetApp data availability, and we'll move into ActiveIQ. So when we're looking at what do we do to make sure that once we've got our environment up and running, that everything is kind of configured properly and that we've got good information about our infrastructure, and we're using some kind of next generation technology. That really is going to be some of the capabilities that we're looking at with ActiveIQ. This particular platform is built on a machine learning and AI platform. Right now, the data that we are gathering some of this intelligence from is a 4 petabyte data lake. And on a daily basis, there are more than 300,000 NetApp devices that are phoning home to give us all of this information that we can really start doing some cool things with. So this first slide here with actionable intelligence, the way that I like to look at this is what are we doing on a very proactive, methodical basis to make sure, do everything that we can to prevent those kind of scenarios where we might scramble for remediation or adding storage or whatever it might be. So capacity monitoring and active predictions that really help us stay ahead is when do we need to add capacity and what type of capacity. And even if we do have multiple arrays, or these arrays are an ONTAP Select or ONTAP or Cloud Volumes ONTAP or an 8200, we've got the ability to take a look at the environment, whether it's software-defined, public cloud, private cloud, or again, pretty much any of the NetApp platforms we have the ability to gather information and data and statistics about. Automated upgrade alerts, so if we do have an environment where we've got an array or we've got a fabric with a couple of different generations of controllers or hard drives or disk enclosures, or maybe we've got some environments where we've got some aging firmware, we have the ability to use this to identify when are some of those things, when are some of those events coming up where I might need to replace drives that are getting quite old, upgrade firmware, or maybe even look at upgrading controllers because something is going end of support. And lastly, configuration best practices. So this really gives us the ability to go in and make sure that our environment is configured properly, and it will identify some misconfigurations in the environment so that we can take action on it. So when we look at actionable intelligence, for me, that what can we do to proactively make sure that our environment is optimally operating on a daily basis? So not everything is a perfect science, and at the end of the day, it's humans that write code, and it's humans that create the hardware, and it's humans that create all of the things that plug into our NetApp infrastructures, and things do happen. So ActiveIQ also helps us with identifying issues when they arise or when we even predict that they could become an issue. So with that 4 petabyte data lake and that more than 300 NetApp devices that are phoning home to this service, we have the ability to even predict when something could become an issue. And it's actually pretty cool. And if you'd like to see a demo on this, we'd be more than happy to take you through it. So maybe there isn't even an alert that is being triggered yet in your environment, but we will get some notifications, and it will let us know the probability of something, how probable something is becoming an alert and opening up a case. So that's a pretty cool feature. Also, automated case creation for replacement parts. So when we're looking at hard drive failures, and again, environments where we do have multiple arrays in a single data fabric, or we've got multiple sites or multiple arrays across multiple sites, take your pick. It's a really nice platform that's going to help managing and manage and maintain the NetApp operating environment very easy. And for those folks, and I know that I am one of those folks, that I will use every resource that I have available, and sometimes I do want answers now, and I don't want to wait to open up a case or wait for an engineer to call me back, maybe on a lower priority issue, or I just need to walk through a potential alert. We have access to a virtual support assistant that's powered by IBM Watson, and this is essentially a chatbot that is driven by machine learning and AI, so that if we can talk with this virtual support assistant to try and get access to the right resources. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if it does need to be escalated to a support case, we most certainly can do that. And what's cool about this is the full transcript of that chat will be saved and presented to the support engineer. So you don't necessarily have to go back through and reiterate everything that has been mentioned in that chat. So again, maybe not the end-all be-all for every single case, but when we start combining things like predictive risks, automated case creation, and access to a machine learning and AI with the chat capabilities, it gets us access to the answers we need faster, and ultimately reduces the number of tier 1 support incidents that we're going to have to take time to remediate, because realistically, sometimes those are the most pain in the neck, and those are the support cases that take you the longest to remediate. And ActiveIQ and NetApp are doing some really cool things to reduce the effort there for some of those issues. So let's take a look at a quick dashboard. So again, this gives you really a global outlook on what's going on in your environment, whether you've got one array or several hundred arrays, or again, cloud volumes ONTAP or ONTAP Select. And this is available to every NetApp customer that has an active support agreement, and it pretty much is set up on its own, and the array starts phoning home automatically after you check a couple of boxes. So not a lot of effort to get it set up, but some pretty powerful things that you can do with ActiveIQ here. So last ActiveIQ slide here. So ActiveIQ OneCollect. This is a service that we can run locally in our environment that has the ability to phone home information about items that are not NetApp, but are most certainly dependent on the NetApp operating environment. So these could be storage hosts. So vCenter, ESXi, Linux, take your pick there. We've got, we're going to collect data from a lot of our existing NetApp storage arrays. Also the networking that is being used to support our storage infrastructure. And also pre-configured and converged infrastructures like FlexPod, excuse me, and some others. So a couple of things that we're going to be able to do here is number one, gather configurations across that environment, as well as gather different versions. So that, again, is where we can kind of extend the ActiveIQ capability to the rest of our environment. And right now, there is performance monitoring that is in beta, and for me this is kind of the, I don't want to say the holy grail, but I mean, when we've got the ability to use a single platform to gather configuration information, versioning information, configuration compatibility information, and lastly performance on a regular basis, that's some pretty cool capabilities, and I'm really looking forward to seeing once the performance information comes out of beta and is full-blown, what that's going to be able to provide our customers. So that's going to wrap it up for a lot of the content here. Looks like we're running up pretty darn close to that half-an-hour mark, which we said we'd keep it to. So again, we talked about ONTAP Select and a couple of different deployment models, whether it's using existing server infrastructure running in a primary data center, cloud volumes ONTAP running up in the public cloud, and lastly, ActiveIQ. And we really have not done a whole, I really haven't brought up hardware a whole lot, and that was kind of the intention of this webinar. Hardware for me is, I mean, it's cool and we've got some great capabilities, but I think some of the things that are cool about NetApp are not necessarily hardware related, so we really wanted to showcase that. So if you'd like to see demo or you would like to have architecture discussions on any of these components, please reach out to us. Again, our contact information is on the website. And actually what we're going to do, we're going to go to our website right now. Let's see if I can get this out there. And we'll go through a couple of bundles that we've put up on our website. And again, we won't spend a ton of time here. So we have a couple of your traditional storage arrays here. So you can, if you want to navigate to this, you can come up to vistaitgroup.com, come to products all the way over and hit NetApp, and that's going to bring you to this page, which is a little bit of an introduction. And at the bottom, we've got some of our current bundles here. We have two 2750s, which are more of your traditional storage array. We've got a 2-node 14.4 terabyte. I believe this one is going to have 12 1.2 terabyte drives in it. And we also have a 2750, and this is going to add some 960 gig SSDs. So you can see that you can really get into a capable array for a great price with the 2700 line. We also threw in a couple of additional ones that, again, are a little outside your traditional storage array. We've got a ONTAP Select cluster, so this would be a 2-node cluster with 20 terabytes of licensing and 20 terabytes of usable storage between the 2 nodes. Now, again, because these are in a cluster, you'd get about 10 terabytes of actual usable after we're mirroring it between the 2 nodes. And you can see that the starting price on that is just a hair more than a physical storage array. So if you do want to deploy this out into an environment, a remote office or a small office that might have 5, 10 terabytes of storage requirements and maybe a couple dozen VMs or 10 VMs or so, it's a great solution that you would have the ability to replicate this back to a primary data center, or even NetApp Cloud Volumes ONTAP, where we've got our licensing. Now, a little asterisk here, you do need to have, let's say if you're going to run this in Amazon, you do have to have your VPC fired up and running, your virtual networking and all of those things configured before we can really start deploying this. But it's super easy to deploy and get running. And again, that gives us the ability to essentially run ONTAP natively in the cloud to replicate our data out to, and again, several different use cases there. So we will get, let me get back to my presentation and we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. So thank you again for taking the time this morning. We really hope it was useful, and we really, when we put together the content, our goal was to have a brief overview on a couple of products that you might not have heard of or spent a lot of time on that we think are really cool and are really add to the overall portfolio that NetApp has to offer.